Hello everybody, today I'm going to show you how to do a open-ended zip application. So what I've got in front of me are two pieces of calico and a open-ended zip. An open-ended zip separates at the bottom, so sometimes they're called a separating zip, sometimes they're called an open-ended zip. My sample piece of fabric is an inch bigger at the top and an inch bigger at the bottom. So the calico strips are 2 inches bigger than the zip. So if you cut yourself 2 pieces of calico that's 2 inches longer than your zip and have your zip ready. So check your zip works, that's the good starting point. So I know that mine's working. And now what I'm going to do is with my 2 pieces, I'm going to take one and put it to one side, and then with the other piece I'm going to fold back the seam allowance. So the seam allowance is 1.5 centimeters. I'm going to fold back and press the seam allowance. By pressing back the seam allowance, you're making sure that you get a nice sharp edge that you can use as a guide. And then I'm going to do exactly the same on the other piece. So I'll put that to one side now and press back the seam allowance on the second piece. So I've pressed the seam allowances on both pieces. So we've got some nice sharp folds there, ready to apply the zip in place. So I'm going to work on one side, and I'm going to make sure that I'm leaving an inch at the top and an inch at the bottom, and that's simply where if you are finishing off your fabric, it'll get finished off at those points. So I'm putting my fold all the way up to my teeth and pinning. So I'm pinning on the right side, and I'm just checking that it's nice and straight and lined up. Now I want the fold to go up to the teeth, but not too close to the teeth so that the zipper pull doesn't work. So what I'm doing is I'm just pinning in place, and then I'm just going to run the zip down to make sure that it's still opening and closing okay. Which it is. So the first stitch that I'm going to do is actually on the seam allowance. So now I've got those pins in as a guide, I'm going to flip it around to the other side and pin the actual seam allowance to the tape. You can just go straight in and push your fold right up to the teeth and do it that way, but I always like to see it on the right side first and then recheck and use it as a guide. when you've pinned it in place, you need to get some tacking thread, and we're going to diagonal tack the seam allowance and the zipper tape together and in place. So I want the fold to be right up against the teeth. So the pins on the right side were just there for a guide to start off with. So now I'm just making sure that there's an equal gap all the way up and that it's straight, close to the teeth. So I've got my tacking thread and my needle, and I'm gonna diagonal tack this in place. So I'm just tacking with a single layer, but I am gonna tack with a diagonal tack. So I'm going through the zip, tape, and the seam allowance only. So I'm not going through the main fabric. I prefer to do a diagonal tack as I feel it's more secure, because you've got the double stitch at each point to hold the zip in place. And then when you've got your tacking stitches in there, you can take out your pins. So I've put my zipper foot in place and I have taken out my pins. Now what I'm going to be doing is the zipper pull is too big, so when I would get to the zipper pull it wouldn't be as close, and because I want it to be a nice continuous line all the way up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the bottom. So I'm going to separate the zip out, and then I'm going to start at the bottom, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my zipper halfway up so I can get really close at the bottom, and I'm going to stitch up so far, and then I'm going to move my zipper pull out the way and continue sewing up. So I'm going to move my camera so that you can see. So I'm just going to start a little bit further up because of the metal at the bottom, and then I'm going to go back to that point after. So all the time I'll just turn the light off so you can see. So the zipper foot is pressed up against the teeth, and then the needle is actually going in the hole, so it's close as it can be to the teeth. So I'm going to stitch up so far and then stop. Sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my needle in, I'm going to lift up my foot, and then I'm going to unzip, hoping that it'll get past, but it's a bit thick. So what I'm going to do, everything's tacked and in place, so it shouldn't move. So I'm just going to unzip the zip, then I'm going to line the sewing machine back up where it was and continue stitching. So just at the metal part, the sewing machine's got caught slightly, so I'm just gonna, by hand, as the metal piece goes under the foot, I'm gonna continue stitching. So I've got that sewn in place, however at the bottom it's still a little bit loose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the zipper up out of the way, and I'm going to go back in and finish off that bottom piece. I'm going to move my zipper foot to the other side, and I'm going to come in this way. So I'm going from the top to the bottom. So I'm going to move my foot to the other side, and I'm going to line it up. I just turn the light off to show you. So I'm going to line it up this way so that I can control when the metal bit comes in line with the zipper foot. So as you can see, the zipper is slightly moving out the way so you can get past. But note that the top and the bottom of the zip have got a slight plastic film on. So what I'm doing now is, rather than pressing my foot down and the motor running it, I'm just running this bit through by hand. So I'm just moving the wheel, the flywheel on the machine, so that it can continue to stitch without me pressing the foot pedal. So let's see where we're up to. So that's stitched in place. Just cut the loose ends off. And then we've got that stitched in place. There. Now I am going to press it back again, but just be really careful if you are going to press, because if you've got plastic teeth, the plastic teeth can melt. So I'm just going to give it a little press just so it's nice and smooth and flat, because the next part is to top stitch. So the next part, so I've put my normal foot back onto my sewing machine because I'm going to be doing a top stitch. So everything's lined up, I've pressed it and it's all equal. And the top stitch that I'm going to apply is just going to keep the seam allowance back. So if you've got the ability to move your needle, you can move your needle. So I'm going to move my needle closer. If you've got a narrow foot, use your narrow foot, it's fine. And because now your zip is attached, So it's close to, so everything's attached. This is just to keep your seam allowance back so it don't keep coming forward. So, and you can do a single or a double stitch, or you can do a decorative stitch to keep it in place. So I'm just going to go for a straight top stitch. So I'm keeping the foot in line all the time with that fold of fabric near the zip teeth. I'm just going to see again if the zipper will move out of the way while I do this bit, which this time it did, so that's good. So I've just finished it right at the bottom. And that's the stitch there next to it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do a second top stitch. I'm going to keep everything lined up in the same place, but I'm just going to offer another stitch down there, just simply as a decorative stitch. So there's the double top stitch, and I can take out, so the red that you can see is the tacking stitch, so I can take the tacking stitch out after. So that's one side completed, and so we're just going to attach the other side to it and line it up now. So I'm going to get my zip and I'm going to zip it back up so that I can line my two pieces together. So what I'm aiming for is that both pieces are lined up, so from the top down to the bottom. And bearing in mind we made it a little bit longer anyway, so if there is any discrepancies we can trim it, but ideally good practice to line everything up. So again, I'm just going to put some guide pins in on the front to then flip it round to the back. So I'm pushing my fold right up to the teeth. And then now that's in, I can come and concentrate on the front. So I'm just making sure this side is slightly harder because this is the side that you've got to line up. So just keep double checking as you're working along it. So that's on the wrong side, that's on the right side. So the next step now, I'm happy that it's all lined up at the top and It's slightly longer at the bottom, but that could have been, you know, it's only a couple of mil, so that's all right. If it was a piece from a pattern, it would be exactly the same. So next step is to tack in place. And it really is the same process all the way through. Now it's pinned in and everything's lined up okay. So this time I'm switching it up. I'm going to do my diagonal tack on the tape, which is on the opposite side that I've just pinned, but it'll work in exactly the same way. So diagonal tack so that it is more secure. You can do a straight tack, it's totally up to you, whatever technique that you prefer. But I would at least, if you've not tried a diagonal tack, I would try it once and then decide for yourself which one you prefer. So when you've done your tacking, just take out your pins and make sure you've got your zipper foot on and in place. So again, I'm going to be stitching from the top all the way down, and halfway down I'm going to take my zipper off. In fact, I can take this off because the zipper is actually on the other side, so that will make it a little bit simple. So now I can just stitch straight down. I'm just going to move the machine so that you can see. So it's lined up in exactly the same way. So the front of the foot is pushed up against the teeth and the needle is going slightly across from the teeth. I've done a back stitch at the beginning and I'm going to stitch all the way down and do a back stitch at the end. So at the end, because of the metal that's there, I'm just easing it through again by hand so that it doesn't get caught. So now we've got that in place. Again, I'm just going to give it a little press, but I'm going to make sure that I'm not going close to the teeth because I don't want them to melt. So I'm just giving it that little press to make sure that it's nice and smooth, ready for my top stitch. So I'm putting on my normal sewing machine foot and I'm going to line up to do the top stitch. So I'm going to do it in exactly the same way. So I'm lining up with the fold of my fold of my fabric, and I'm going to top stitch all the way up. Oh. So that's my top stitch, and then I'm going to apply a double line so it's the same as the other side. So I'm going to keep it lined up in the same place, but I've moved my needle position across. Again, you don't have to do a double stitch, you can keep it as a single, or you can add in a decorative stitch, totally up to you. So now that that is sewn up and finished, I'm going to line both of my pieces up. And I have got my zip in place. So what would happen next is your whatever is going on at the top would then stitch on there to give you a nice neat seam, and that would probably be further down, so the zipper would be finished off. And then at the bottom it would be in exactly the same way, so the stitch line would come across the bottom, or it would be a hem where it would be folded up and top stitched in place. So to keep your sample nice and neat, you can always turn up the edge and just press it in place to go into your folder, or however you're going to present them. So I'm just going to press mine up. So I've got a nice line. And that's the open-ended zip finished.